Hello and welcome to the Future Self podcast. I'm Jess Honan in my fourth year of a Bachelor of Laws, Bachelor of Arts and Diploma of Languages at the Australian National University. I'm majoring in French, minoring in Human Rights, Arabic and German. And I'm particularly interested in dispute resolution and international law, which is where I hope to work when I graduate at the end of next year. Today I'm joined by François Kernin, a Protection Officer with UNHCR Regional Bureau for Asia and the Pacific. In his capacity, he manages the Regional Mixed Movement Monitoring Unit team and works on issues related to asylum and migration, smuggling and trafficking, and protection at sea. Hi François, thank you for speaking with me today. I'm excited to hear your perspectives on your career and working in international relations.
Thank you for having me.
So, to begin with, can you please give us a brief outline on what your work actually entails?
Sure. So, as you know, I work with UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency. So that's a UN agency that was created after the Second World War to help protect and find solutions for the Europeans that had been displaced by the conflict. When UNHCR was created, member states initially thought that a mandate of 3 years would be sufficient to resolve all refugee issues. So many years later, we are still here, and unfortunately, the number of refugees today, if I'm not mistaken, is above 20 million for refugees that are under the mandate of UNHCR. I think the work that UNHCR does, if I can simplify, I think we do three things. First, we respond with life-saving emergency assistance. So, for example, in the case of conflict, people flee generalized violence, persecution, will cross the border. UNHCR will be there on the other side of the border to provide that emergency life-saving assistance in collaboration with our partners. The second type of activity that we do is safeguarding fundamental human rights of refugees. And the third element is related to building better futures for refugees, which in the best case scenario will involve either returning home or finding solutions in another country where the rights of refugees will be recognized at the same level as nationals from that country. As part of my work, I tend to focus on the second category of work, so safeguarding fundamental human rights of refugees. Within the regional bureau team of UNHCR, one area of focus I work on is related to protection at sea. So, in simple terms, is working with states and conducting advocacy. So refugees who are in distress at sea will be rescued, disembarked in a timely manner in a place of safety, and following the disembarkation, that appropriate services and assistance are provided to the rescued persons. And so the advocacy I conduct often involves working with states to develop policies, procedures that will ensure that the rights of refugees are recognized and protected, which in that space means making sure that they're protected at the same level as any other national, irrespective of their legal status or nationality. So working with states to develop those procedures, but also doing work to lay the groundwork for those procedures to be adopted by states, which may involve raising awareness about a particular situation, explaining relevant international standards, and communicating about the people who are often in a perilous situation on the high sea. So I don't know if that was a long answer to your question, but happy to take any follow-up question.
No, that was really interesting. Thank you. I would also be interested to hear, what made you decide that this was the area in which you wanted to work? Like, why refugees? Why human rights?
I may give you a long answer to that one too. I mean, to be honest, when I was at university, for a very long time, I really didn't know what I wanted to do as a career. And so I've always tried to keep my options open. So I didn't want to specialize too quickly in any particular area. For this, the school I attended in France, Sciences Po, was very useful because there's a very broad curriculum. I think what was the trigger that really convinced me in during one of my last year maybe at university, I did an internship with the UNHCR, which is within the galaxy of UN agencies, is an organization that's responsible for the coordination of humanitarian activities and response. And so as part of my internship, I had the opportunity to have an overview of humanitarian responses in Syria and later with another internship in the Philippines, which I found fascinating. And I also felt that that work was also very meaningful because you were contributing to protecting people, assisting people who would otherwise not be protected often by their state of origin. So that was meaningful, but it was also interesting. It was you were working. I was working on very contemporary issues, something you will see on the headlines in a newspaper. So that also contributed to the interest. And I won't hide that it was also very, the opportunity to work in this international space. And it's also really exciting. You have the opportunity to travel to different countries, discover different culture, which was great and contributed to make the work always interesting and changing. I think I was terrified of the possibility of having the same job for 20 years and stay on the same at the same desk on the same chair, dealing with the same issues. So this field really allowed me to do many different work, and the mandate of UNHCR is very broad. We are exposed to many different issues and do many different activities at the end of the day.
I think that's really interesting what you're saying about it being that sort of first-hand experience that got you really understanding why UNHCR work is so important and why refugees and human rights are important issues. I guess for me it was the same sort of experience where I decided that was the field that I wanted to work in. When I was in my first year of university, I got to go over to Myanmar for a few weeks to do some first-hand research into ethnic conflict, and it was the same sort of getting to actually see firsthand, I guess, the repercussions that sort of event can have on people's lives made me realise that, again, this was really valuable work and that I could see myself in that in the future. So just looking at, I guess, the possibility of working in this field that you're currently in, what kind of skills do you think are essential for having a career in human rights with UNHCR, for example?
I remember attending a presentation by one of my teachers, I think in fourth year at university, where he was explaining what career is it to work with a humanitarian organization. Something he said then stayed with me. He said, if what you expect of your life, or if your expectation when you grow up are to have barbecues with your good friends every Sunday and have a dog, that's probably not the field you want to choose. And I think that's true. I mean, you are exposed to, you need to move very regularly. Sometimes you work in very difficult environments where security may not be guaranteed. And I think you need to be flexible on many different aspects, flexible on how you manage, family and friend relationships, which is not easy, but also flexible in terms of your, your way of life, your comfort, and some of the, hobbies and activities you will be able to do. I think that's one aspect in terms of more, let's say, personal competencies. So I think flexibility there is very important. Now, in terms of more academic skills that you will be developing, I mean, for UNHCR, we tend to give a lot of importance to legal background, because a lot of our work is protecting refugees, is working with governments on, legal reform, legal procedures. We do give importance to these skills, and by extension within the UN system, I think writing skills are very important. Being able to draft clearly and make compelling argument is something that is valued very much. But now, I mean, the legal expertise, that's very relevant for UNHCR, but within the UN system, I mean, there are many different UN agencies and they have different areas of focus. And so every UN agency will be looking for different skills.
I'd just like to follow on what you said about, I guess, the whole moving around a lot, the family relationships and that sort of thing. I suspect that that's very emotionally draining, being away from friends and family. And I've read that this kind of work is especially susceptible to causing burnout. Do you think that that is the case? And if so, what do you do to try and manage that kind of stress?
So the short answer is yes, definitely. I mean, you often work in a very high pressure environment. The people you're trying to protect may be in a life-threatening situation. Your work in terms of advocacy, in terms of providing assistance, can directly impact that situation. So the stakes can be very high. Sometimes because we deal with states or a lot of other partners, there's also a lot of expectations on you, on the organization, and you need to deliver. It doesn't make for a very peaceful work environment. I think this is particularly the case in an emergency situation where you may work super long hours from the moment you wake up to the moment you go to sleep, just to make sure you do your ultimate best to assist and protect the people who need it. And so the stress is certainly there. Now, in terms of the best way to manage it, I think cultivating hobbies and activities outside of work is extremely important. It's not always easy when you come home and you are exhausted after a long day of work, but it is important because it will allow you to have this little personal space where you can breathe and think about something else than work. And work can be very sad and traumatizing in some circumstances. So having that personal space is very important. So yeah, personal activities, trying to maintain friendship, family relationships, even if people are in a different time zone, is also very important.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point about all of the maintaining hobbies. I'd never really considered that. One thing that I did want to ask you about, going back to skills that are particularly important in this field, I've always been interested in languages, and I felt like this would probably be something very valuable for working in international law, human rights, international relations. Based on your experience, how important would you say is knowing foreign languages?
I think it's very important. I mean, within the UN system, in some circumstances, knowing an additional language and the right additional language may be a requirement for promotion. So I know in my organization, you will need to know at least 2 relevant languages for certain promotion. And we are talking about middle managers, so it's not even a super high position. So I think it's something we give a lot of importance to. So that in terms of career, but in terms of your daily work, if you speak the language of the authorities or of the refugees you are working with, I mean, makes a huge difference. I mean, a huge difference because then people can understand you better, you can better build trust. That will be fundamental for your work with them moving forward. So no, it's extremely important. and I said right languages. So there, I think, at least for the humanitarian sector and the UN, I mean, maybe there are a few I can flag. One within the UN, there are 8, if I'm not mistaken, 8 official UN languages. So, I mean, it's good to have a look at the list. So I saw from your CV, you are studying French and Arabic. I mean, those are 2 excellent languages to study, not only because they're part of those 8 UN official languages, but also because there are languages that are rather rare within the UN system, while there are a major crisis happening in both areas. So, I mean, the Middle East, I mean, sadly huge in terms of scale and in terms of mobilization of humanitarian actors, and few speak Arabic. So being able to speak Arabic, you will be able to better work with your national colleagues, authorities, etc. And in the Francophone world, French is also important, and there are few people who speak French and will be able to work in French. So I think both are important. And maybe just to conclude, your level of writing and speaking is also important. I think it will be expected that you will be at least be able to work, so write and speak in these languages.
I think that's a really interesting point about being able to speak the language of the refugees. I guess especially in your work with the UNHCR, I think it's really important that you're hearing the refugees' voices. And so, yeah, that's something that I'd never really considered, was actually looking at languages that is relevant to the refugees rather than just the languages that the organisations conduct themselves in. So, yeah, thank you for that point. I found that really interesting. Going back to, I guess, skills, is there anything else that you think people that are interested in this field should study, prepare for, or learn, specifically while we're at university, in order to equip ourselves for this kind of career?
I feel, at least for the UN system, we tend to give a lot of importance to expertise. So it's easier to apply for something when you have already advanced knowledge in one particular issue. It doesn't guarantee you'll be able to enter, but I think it would be in the first stage of your career, I think people will give importance to that expertise. And that's what will give you sometime a seat at the table on some particular discussions. But I will also not advise to put all your bets in one direction. I think it's also important to be flexible and to be able to deal with a wide range of issues, not only for your career. I mean, we never know where we will end up. You may study, I don't know, refugee law, and maybe at the end you will be working on climate change. But beyond that, I think it's also in terms of skills. Sometimes being a very narrow technical expert is great, but most often we'll have to deal with a range of situations that go far beyond the skills we have spent years fine-tuning. So it doesn't fully answer your question, but yeah, I mean, give importance to some expertise, but do continue to keep an open mind and an awareness about the world around you. And that can go far beyond international relations. I mean, sometimes something you will learn in art may be helpful for an advocacy campaign later on, for example.
Following on from that, I've had quite a lot of people tell me that working in this field, it's almost essential to do postgraduate studies. Have you found this to be the case, and do you think that there is a benefit to going on and doing a master's?
Yes, I mean that's a requirement, I think.
And what sort of thing do you recommend studying after a bachelor's degree? What should I study in the master's?
So just for the UN system, those entry positions are extremely competitive. I mean, there are a few positions that are open, a few junior positions that are open for anyone to apply. I mean, the Human Resources Department, they receive thousands of applications. So it means that, I mean, the competition is so high that if you don't have the master degree, I mean, you will be among the first to be eliminated from the pre-selection. So I think it's fundamental. Now, in terms of the topic of your master degree, it depends a little bit what organization you would like to work. For UNHCR, having a law background, PD or something like this could be very helpful. I mean, in my case, I did an LLM in International Human Rights Law, and that's something I have not regretted. But some other colleagues went through a more traditional legal pathway, so they became, full-fledged lawyers, passed the bar exam, and only afterwards they joined UNHCR. But that topic, I think, depends a little bit on where you want to work. And even within UNHCR, even if we have a lot of lawyers, a lot of them, but there are also some other colleagues who come with different skills that are also very helpful. Some of my colleagues are experts in information management. Others are experts in education, livelihood, development. At the end of the day, it's very broad, but they are all experts in their field.
You say that getting a job within the UN system is incredibly competitive. Do you have any recommendations on how I could make myself stand out when I'm doing these applications?
So there are several entry points. In my case, I went through all the different types of contract that I think exist within the UN system. I started doing internships. Then I had some sort of short consultancy contract. Then I worked as a UN volunteer. And then there are some specific programs that are funded by governments. So the GPO program, I don't know if Australia has one, but those are really great opportunities. So, I mean, to give you concrete advice, I will look at any internship opportunities. It's usually, in your contract, there is a commitment that you won't be hired afterwards, and that's something you acknowledge. But sometimes, 6 months after your contract, if there is a need on the work you were doing, some opportunities may emerge then. UN volunteer positions, I think, is something you should definitely look into. There are two types. I think there's UN youth volunteer, which sometimes give opportunities to very young professionals, and those are great. The GPO program, I don't know if Australia has one. France, in my case, had one. And so they funded my position for 2 years, after which I was able to apply for regular positions within the UN system. And that made a huge difference. Maybe to conclude, what's important is just to have your foot in the door. I mean, work hard and hope to be lucky. And that's how I personally went through that door.
So moving on a little bit from that line, I guess before we finish, one thing that I wanted to hear from you was whether working within the UN has been what you expected, or whether it was kind of very different. If it was different, what are some of the things that were surprising for you?
Well, I never thought I would be working for the UN, to be honest. Never. And some days I'm still, 10 years later, I'm still pinching myself when I realize I am indeed working with the United Nations. It has been a privilege. I mean, it's a great opportunity to contribute to something that matters, to be working directly with governments, but also working directly with refugees and persons who have been displaced. That's also a privilege in trying to help them directly. Something that has been different, maybe the first thing is that the professional world is very different from university. I mean, the expectations are different, the skills, competencies that are appreciated are different. So that was something I did not necessarily expect. The second thing, it's if you look at career and work environment, it's very competitive. I think the UN system, or at least it was the case in my experience, which can make the the work environment with partners or with colleagues sometimes challenging. But it's all manageable. But I think that's something I never thought of before, and that you realize when you join and you work for a few years.
Yeah, you've said a few things today that I had never really thought of. So it was really valuable, I think, for me to be able to hear a little bit from your first-hand experience about working in the UN and working in international relations. That's all we have time for. Thank you so much for speaking with me. It was an absolute pleasure to hear your perspective, and I think really valuable.
You're welcome. Good luck with the end of your studies.
Thank you.
Hello, it's Ivana here. I'm the producer of Future Self, and I'm here with Jess Honan, fresh from her conversation with François Kernin. Jess and I were just talking about whether we pronounced his name correctly. Sincerely hope that we did. So Jess, how did you feel after speaking to him?
Yeah, I thought some of his perspectives were actually really interesting. I mentioned this in the podcast already, but it's always really valuable to speak to someone who actually is working in that field and knows exactly what it's like. You can read as much on the internet about the UN as you like, or about those kind of international organisations, but it's not until you actually meet an individual in that field that I think you really understand what it is like to have that sort of career. So I guess any opportunity is really valuable to do so.
I do think that it does make a difference, because it's not just about like passively absorbing information, but having that opportunity to kind of ask them these burning questions that you might have had. So one of the things that you said in your conversation with him, one of the things that you asked him had to do with whether there was anything unexpected that he learned or encountered or whatnot across his career with the UN. And I guess I'm wondering if there was anything that François said that you hadn't expected.
Yeah, I guess I have kind of already flagged this, but what he was saying about learning the language of the refugees, I thought that was so interesting and so obvious at the same time. I don't know why I had never considered the fact that it's really important that we are speaking to the people that we're working with, rather than just, I guess, staying in some sort of bureaucratic state where we're just talking to our workmates, rather than actually making sure that the people that we're trying to help get an input and they get to tell us how we can help them. And that I started a Diploma of Languages this year, and in that I'm studying Arabic. I have a huge interest in the Middle East and in Middle Eastern politics, and so I think when he said that really reinforced to me the fact that learning Arabic will be a good language and hopefully really useful in the future.
And you also have French under your belt as well. Was that a language that you started perhaps in high school and then just continued through into uni?
No, so I'm definitely by no means fluent in French. I study it at university, and I picked it up at university without ever having studied French before. The reason that I chose French was because I knew that, and as François kind of pointed out, a lot of institutions and specifically international organisations operate in French. And I'm interested in international law, and that body of law is also still quite underpinned by the French language. And so straight away I thought it would be a really useful language to have, so that's why I picked up French.
So the UN and other major organisations that deal in international law, as François was saying, it can involve a lot of moving around, and you may not see friends and family very often. You have to be very flexible about your living conditions and your personal comfort, and there's just a lot of instability, I suppose. How do you feel about the prospect of these sorts of things?
I think I'm the sort of person that finds that really exciting. I know a lot of people like the idea of I guess having family and friends around them, and I definitely love my family and friends, and I think being away from them would be really hard, but I find that kind of environment exciting and very challenging in a good way, and I like the idea of, while I'm young, being able to go out and see as much of the world as I can and learn as much about different cultures and different languages as possible, and to try and make a difference in a way that I think I can. Not everyone is necessarily good at this legal background. Like, I know, for example, that there are some things that I just couldn't do, whereas I know that I can help out in terms of like the law of human rights. And so I think this is a good way of me using my skills in a way that's particularly valuable. And just, I guess, what I was saying about the moving around being exciting and challenging. When I finished high school, I went over to Germany and I did a year as an exchange student there. And so I guess that kind of gave me a bit of a taste as to what it's like leaving your friends and your family for a short period of time and just trying to establish new relationships and new languages and new friends. And so it was a hard year. It was very challenging emotionally, and I think that showed me that it's something that I can do, but also that it's so rewarding that it's something that I would like to do.
Well, I hope that it is something that you will get to do as well. Thank you so much for being on Future Self.
No worries. Thank you for having me.